When did Wales emerge onto history? What caused it to become a nation? And when was it? Where was it? And who were the people? That fits right into this history series that I've been giving you on this channel. And this is the prologue to the book When Was Wales by ben.llywelyn. And he gives a very good explanation of how this came into being through a rupture between Rome and Britain, melded together, really, a very violent fusion. This is ben.llywelyn, and that's what this video is about for you today. Somewhere around the middle of the 6th century BCE, an anonymous man from Massilia, present-day Marseille in France, a Greek colony in those days, he traveled through the Straits of Gibraltar, the edge of the world at that time, to a place, Tortosa, a people there. They told him of trading with a people far to the north, present-day Brittany. And they in turn traded with a people that they hadn't come into contact with before, two large islands. And as he ventured north, names came out of the mist to him: Albion and Yarn. And these are clearly Old Irish names for these two islands of the British Isles, but it's the first names we have for these places. And as Greeks expanded their knowledge of the world, these became the words attached to these islands. But another Greek came along, Pythias, around 324 BCE, give or take, also from Massilia, a merchant, a Greek man, and he ventured north as well. And he gave them a different name. He described these islands, both of them, as Britannia. This word survives in Welsh today. That's the name of the island, Brydain. It's feminine, as it was in Greek. And what this word probably originally meant was picked, like picture-covered people, shape-shifting people, form-turners. Very wizard-like. But the Romans, and you'll notice when Latin languages change, they switch B and V and P often, and they probably took this Greek name and pronounced it Britannia, softening the P to a B, and that's where we get Britain. And Julius Caesar invaded this island in the years 55 to 54 BCE. He didn't make much headway, but he left a deep imprint, and we get the first glimpse of different groups within Britain at this time. And the West, here in Wales, they were said to think that they came out of holes in the ground because they were the oldest people in these islands. They were depicted as very savage, uncivilized, raw flesh-eating type people with furs and big clubs. Now, this is probably just Roman propaganda to heighten up Julius Caesar's exploits, but there's probably a tinge of truth in the fact that the people thought of themselves as the oldest people on this island, because as you go into Wales, it's easy to get stuck here. It's the geography. But it's after 43 AD and Emperor Claudius's invasion of Britain that peoples in Wales really come to light. By the 50s and 60s, people who were in Wales here were fighting the Romans. And one general proposed the extermination of people here because they put up such a fight, almost wiping out an entire legion at one point, which was not an easy feat considering how advanced Rome was. But the peoples here in Wales were separated more than you would imagine today from the southeast and Rome, because the Severn was quite a barrier, and there was woodland, an ancient, immense woodland. The Forest of Dean today is all that's left. It would have separated peoples on this side here in Wales from all to the southeast, and the Romans would have had to punch through that, and the Silures gave them quite a fight. The Roman historian Tacitus said the Silures resembled the swarthy, curly-haired, dark Iberians of the peoples who would eventually form Spain. And that was the southeast of Wales, present-day Cardiff and Gwent. Further to the west, you had the Demetae, who they were another tribe, or a confederation of tribes. Up going into the northeast, you had Cornovi, which to me sounds like corn, the word for horn in Welsh. Along the north coast, you had Tegangli, which probably would have been Tegangli. And across what some would have called the wilderness of Wales was the Ordovices. They wiped out a few Roman squadrons at one point, and most of them in response were wiped out by Rome. But Ynys Môn, the island in the north, we're not sure which tribe held this, a place where a lot of them gathered in religious ritual, and acolytes or religious disciples were taught here by the Druidic priest caste. And that Menai Strait there was quite a barrier for the Romans to cross as well. And if you've ever been there, when the mist flows down of an eye, it's very spooky and eerie, and I can understand why it was a holy place to those people. But many of the names in that region come from later immigration. Irish, that they haven't left much of a trace, they were absorbed, but it's there. These two peninsulas, it's quite odd that a nation formed out of them, because the geography is impossible. How could a nation emerge in this place of so many valleys and zigzag roads between mountains that are pressed up against each other in oblong directions? There's no natural place for a great conurbation of people, and that's what we come to. The place, and then the people. The first thing to grasp about Wales is it makes no sense whatsoever. How could a nation emerge out of these two peninsulas? Wales, I suppose like any nation, exists only because people created it. Invented it. They had to, they had no choice, as you'll see over the course of this series. People had inherited this over thousands of years before Rome, through the Bronze Age, living in tiny, tiny clusters. Because the land, upland bog and wet and craggy, bony, skeletal landscape, it's not conducive to great masses of people. And for about 500 or 600 years before Rome, they had probably lived as a confederation loosely of Celtic-speaking peoples. We don't know what was there before. And as Rome forced itself in upon for 400 years, utterly changing them. And after 200 years of that occupation, they became free men or full citizens of the Roman Empire, which that was a very deep emancipation psychologically. People aspired to the right of Roman citizens, otherwise you didn't live a very good life, and being liberated in that sense was a rupture that forever changed the society of this island. And so for half that time we lived as free men in a Romano-British Commonwealth, increasingly adopting the ways of civilization with civitas, cities, run mostly by ourselves, but with Roman administration and taxes, of course, and the benefits of defense, allowing us to absorb more culture from Rome and language. It changed our language. But with the breaking of Britannia, they emerged into a little patchwork, knotted and broken, of independent British kingdoms, facing a new enemy from the east, gradually shaking out into 4 major political polities across Wales. One of them ruled by immigrants from Ireland in the southwest, and the other ruled by a dynasty from southern Scotland in the north. But they all gradually assimilated into an emerging Welsh culture out of this Romano-British fusion. And by the 8th century, they found that Britain that was theirs had been removed from them, and began calling themselves Cymru, our fellow countrymen. The stronger kings started to hammer out a Wales between them, but it was a very slow process. And they had a hard time of it because Wales stands within this highland belt that kind of arcs in a broken S across Britain from South Wales all the way up into southern Scotland, across the back spine of North England. And the valleys cutting in different ways forced polities to emerge in different directions from each other with no central place. And that's a story that runs through Wales. There's no natural place for a capital. Cardiff is almost an imposition, as beautiful as it can be. It's not natural, it's not an organic growing as a capital city in Wales. Wales became fragmented into valley settlements. From the River Severn, there's fertile hills cutting up into the land toward the centre, but the fertile land, mostly along the south, is an extension of Western England, basically, along Morgannwg, pinched by the jutting of Cwmynedd, by the Morgan Gap, and then out in southern Pembrokeshire. And then there's another ribbon along the north coast, and then jutting down into Dyfed Clwyd is another fertile area. And also Ynys Môn, separated again. Ynys Môn is sheltered by 3 concentric rings of mountains here, which explains why the Kingdom of Gwynedd, which held it, was able to hold out for so long against such odds. So we have 4 fertile lands in our country that are very separated from each other and not conducive to communication with each other, and this forced Wales to emerge as a country that was broken. And there are river valleys which weave some good living through these hills, such as Afon Clwyd, Afon Conwy, Afon Gwy, Afon Wisg, Afon Teifi, Tywi, Afon Dyfrdwy. But these had clusters of wood around them at the beginning, and it wasn't something you really wandered into. So Wales was impenetrable, even to its own people. Not until the 18th century were these woods beginning to be cleared and roads beginning to be cut across the landscape, but by then they came from a different direction than from within our country. And it amplified the poverty of our people. The land could only support so many, certainly in the early days, and these cuttings off from each other accentuated the term in Welsh that you hear everywhere, bro, meaning mon petit pays, my little country, the little cultural nucleus of your region where you're from. A very colloquial, localized mindset. It's very Welsh, and the landscape is so conducive to it. There's not a flat expanse where everybody can gather. Meetings are broken up across the landscape. And this condemned Wales from the beginning to the margins of social history and power on these islands, even though Wales, underneath its bony, barren surface, is very rich. The resources that crawl across it are not. It's acidic, it's salty, it's bitter, it's wet, too wet, damp, hard to breathe in places, tight, moldy, muddy. You have to be quite tough to form a country out of this place. And because this place was so difficult to find any sense of unity in the nation, the seaways around it have always been very important. And this highlights where things began. It's no coincidence that Tydddewi, or St. David's, our holiest pilgrim site, was at the crossing of sea lanes. It's not because it was far and remote. It seems remote to London, but as it emerged in the days of early Christianity, hey, if you're liking this content, give me a thumbs up down there. Hit that like. Thanks, I appreciate it. Diolch. It was at the crossings between here and Ireland and going north and south. It was at the focal point, not the margins. So Wales turned to the sea to begin, but as that lack of unity accentuated itself because of the divisions in the land, they found themselves increasingly in the margins, and they couldn't turn to the sea because others controlled it. And this turning inward is one of many shapeshifts Wales has taken. Like the mists which cover this land, there's many different shapes, and just like Prydain itself probably meant people of different forms, Wales has continued to shapeshift over time. And one of the great characters of the Mabinogion is Gwydion, a shape-shifting wizard. The first people were megalith builders, part of a wider Western European culture, and the first enclaves are on Llŷn, the peninsula in the north, and Pembro, the peninsula in the south, and burial chambers along the coast in Ceredigion and Ynys Môn, like Bryn Celli Ddu. These people were facing outward. The inland bits of Wales aren't as penetrated early on. That took a long time, centuries. In Gwent and Morgannwg, we see building up of population earliest, but also it seems the area further east around Stonehenge, or Cora Cewri in Gymraeg in Welsh, was part of a culture they were willingly and proudly a part of, some kind of cultural confederation, or at least on peaceful relations, we can imagine. And Preseli, the blue stones, that was taken from there to Cora Cewri, which suggests some cooperation on a deep, wide political level. Sometime during the first millennium BCE, this megalith culture evolved or transmuted and changed into a Celtic warrior caste culture, common across Britain, and it became more and more developed and complex in alliances and enemies before Rome came. Certainly, the Gauls across the water in present-day France, their culture and Britain were almost the same culture, it appears. They may have been a mutually intelligible language for much of that stretch. And when Rome came in to Gaul, a wave of migrants came into Britain. New peoples, new kingdoms, or new polities emerged in present-day England, a Belgae, Parisi. But that didn't happen in present-day Wales. So there's a divergence here. Like, you get the small boat crisis in England. It doesn't really affect us in Wales. It's probably something similar. The art is dazzling across Britain in this era. Spiral weavings, warrior dressings, fanciful chariots. It becomes increasingly ornate and rich on the eve of Rome. They had a pantheon of deities. Dawn, a fertility goddess of some kind. Saint Bridget in Christianity comes from a Celtic or British goddess. She was some kind of shepherdess and fire goddess. Amaethon was some kind of agricultural god. The word for agriculture in Welsh today is amaeth, or Amaethyddiaeth, clearly comes from that root and that time. Caerleith, the earlier, or one of the earlier names for London, Llundain today, comes from Llydd. This is a British god. He was probably some kind of universally loved craftsman god. And Rhiannon, from the Mabinogi tales, she was clearly some type of early deity that got swallowed into Christianity, and like many deities got watered down into being a folk hero or a legend hero. By the 3rd century, we were seeing martyrs, Christian martyrs. And so whatever earlier religion was here, it was forgotten quite early and quickly. Christianity was a blitz across the landscape. You can see it today in the names of places. Llan is everywhere, meaning a religious enclosure. The Mabinogion tales are fascinating because they're like a layer cake of different eras blended into each other without any coherence of which layer represented which time. You can see glimpses of Iron Age themes connecting us to Ireland and the deities like Rhiannon and the underworld. But it's also speckled with Romano-British themes, and as Rome became a more permanent feature in the lives of our people, it changed us into something else. But we never completely forgot that we were fighting Rome when the Kingdom of Gwent emerged in the southeast. It listed Ceridog Frechfras, who was the legendary Ceridog who fought the Romans, as one of their founders, their legendary figures, and several kingdoms adopted legends around this man and his descendants. And I wonder, in Branwen, the second story of the Mabinogi, with Branwen going to Ireland and the destruction that ensues, and coming back and seeing a high king upon Britain, and they open up a door towards Cornwall, and they remember all their sorrows. I wonder if that's kind of what it's about, that they remembered that Rome had come. And there was a destruction there. There was a changing of who they were. There was a fusion. And whatever these people were coming into Rome, what we came out of was something different. We were Romano-Britons from this point on. And from this, we would eventually call ourselves Welsh. And how Rome changed us, and what we changed into, that's what we come to in the next episode. If you've made it this far, please consider joining me on Patreon, on the screen now. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much to each and every one of you who do contribute. Thank you so much for watching. Hwyl fawr.